That morning we shut everything off. No engines. No radios. Just the two of us on the old hillside above the sealed mine. In the grey before sunrise, our injured Bobcat returned, tracing the same slow circle as always, like he was thinking it over. Then, just when we thought we knew his routine, he stood up in a way that left us silent. My name is Walter Briggs, 63, and these days my knees complain louder than the radio in our old rescue truck. I've spent most of my life on these mountains, on a small county rescue team that now does more inspecting than rescuing. We still call ourselves the team. Habit is strong. The old copper site on North Ridge isn't really a mine anymore. Years back, a collapse sealed the main shaft. We poured concrete, sunk steel beams, posted bright warning signs. Around here, folks just call it the closed mouth. We don't revisit the details. We let the hill keep some things. Our job now is to make sure no one forgets that the mountain remembers. We check fences, replace signs knocked down by wind, listen for new cracks in stone. Most days, nothing happens, and we log that nothing carefully. Quiet. In our line of work is good news. The place sits in a shallow bowl of rock and scrub pine. Old rails rust out of the ground like ribs. And in winter, the whole hollow turns the colour of an old photograph, greys and browns, and a sky that never quite makes up its mind. It isn't pretty in any postcard way. One autumn, a young tech-mounted trail cameras around the bowl for a routine survey. Just motion sensors. Nothing fancy. We expected deer. Maybe a black bear cutting through. Instead, a week later, he printed a frame and slapped it on the break room wall with a grin. Look at this. The picture showed a bobcat stepping past a twisted rail. Shoulders heavy, coat thick, ears tipped with little flags of fur. Beautiful animal. But my eye went straight to the right hind leg. It hovered just off the ground, toes barely touching, like he didn't fully trust it anymore. The kid suggested calling him Tripod. I shook my head. He's got 4 legs. I said, one just argues more than the others. Joking about scars never sat right with me. I'd seen too many people try to make light of things that still woke them up at night. As more photos came in, A pattern emerged. The Bobcat our camera's clock stamped him again and again, returned to the same arc near the sealed shaft. 4 clear prints. Then a slight drag. Then 4 again. Always just outside the fence line. Never up against it. Never fully turned away. On paper, we logged it as Bobcat activity near closed shaft, no intervention required. Behind those words, though, something tugged at us. We were used to injured things being carried to our door by sirens and headlights. This one had chosen a different route, carrying his injuries up a mountain on his own time. The younger guys tossed around names between calls. Rust. One said. Copper. None fit. The cat's coat in the grainy photos reminded me of the rock up there. When rain darkened, it patches of slate and shadow. Slate. I thought, filing the word away without saying it out loud. Weeks passed. The trail cameras kept catching him near dawn. A low shape threading through the bowl while the sky was still deciding on a colour. We'd gather around the monitor for a minute before heading out. Coffee cooling in our hands. Watching that injured leg negotiate with the ground. Little by little, the closed mouth of the hill stopped being just a hazard on our checklist. It became a place with a regular visitor, a bobcat with a stubborn gait and roots only he understood. We still drove up there for fences and signs, but I'd be lying if I said that was all I went for. The cameras were one thing. Seeing slate with my own eyes was another. It happened on a brittle November morning when frost turned the access road into a washboard of cold. I parked the truck just short of the bowl and walked in. Boots crunching louder than I liked. The hill was still half asleep. The sky held that thin strip of pale along the horizon, and the concrete plug over the old shaft was just a darker block against the rock. My breath puffed out in short ghosts. I stopped when the road widened and let my ears catch up. At first, I thought the dark knot near the rails was just another boulder. Then it moved a slow adjustment, a stretch of shoulder, the lift of a head. Slate. He was smaller than the photos made him seem, but denser somehow. Like every pound of him had been negotiated with the mountain. He looked toward the sealed shaft, not at me. That injured leg tucked under his body. The other 3 carrying his weight without complaint. I stayed where I was. hands loose at my sides. We're trained not to call out to wildlife, not to turn them into characters in our stories. After a moment, his ears flicked in my direction. He didn't bolt. He just included me in the inventory. Shaft, fence, cold, human, all catalogued behind those pale eyes. Then his gaze slid past me to the rim of the bowl, as if checking that the world up there still lined up. A breeze slipped down the slope, carrying the smell of old metal and pine needles. Slate lifted his nose, reading it like a newspaper. I watched the muscles along his flank tense and release. The small flinch when that right hind leg shifted under him. Not agony, just a reminder that nothing was as easy as it used to be. For a while, we simply shared the air. My knees ached in that familiar, dull way they had adopted since I turned 60. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought surfaced. I knew something about having one part of you renegotiate every ordinary movement. A small rock rolled under my boot as I shifted. The sound ticked against the bowl's walls. Slate's attention snapped fully to me then, sharp and focused. But still he didn't run. The distance between us was wrong for comfort, too close for strangers, too far for help. Lena's voice crackled over the radio at my shoulder. Briggs, you at the closed mouth yet? I kept my eyes on Slate as I answered. Yeah. Fence is good. Signs are up. Hills quiet. It wasn't a lie. I just didn't add. And the Bobcat is sitting here, listening to us rearrange his morning. The radio squawk seemed to decide things for him. He pushed himself up, putting a careful fraction of weight on that arguing leg. Step, step, question, answer. He moved along his arc and slipped between two scrub pines. His tail, the last thing to vanish into the grey. I stayed a moment longer, looking at the space he'd left behind, then turned to inspect the fence. I ran a gloved hand along the wire, feeling each staple bite into wood. Work is a comfort when feelings get too complicated. Steel, wood, tension, these things make sense. Back at the truck, I added a short note in the logbook. Observed Bobcat near shaft at 6:14. It felt thin compared to the silence we'd just shared. But forms don't have a box for that. There's nowhere to write. He saw me, and I saw him, and neither of us ran. On the drive down, the ridge sat in the side mirror like a hunched shoulder. I glanced at it more often than the road required. Something had shifted, small but real. The mine wasn't just a place we watched for human mistakes anymore. It was also part of a route for an injured cat who refused to stay home. Trouble rarely arrives as a landslide. More often, it shows up as a memo. Ours came in late winter, printed on crisp paper with a logo from the regional office. Preliminary assessment, limited exploratory work at North Ridge Containment Site. I read the title twice before the meaning really landed. The proposal laid it out in tidy paragraphs. New ventilation tests. Temporary fan installations near the old shaft. Acoustic impact studies. All the careful language people use when they want to poke at something they once promised to leave alone. The closed mouth was being asked to whisper again. At the briefing, a young engineer clicked through slides on a projector. Colourful diagrams of airflow covered the wall. Arrows pushing through rock like it was nothing more than cheese. On his map, our hill wasn't a place with a scar and a bobcat. It was just Site 7B. We'll need your team up there during fan tests. Our supervisor, Carol, said, looking over her glasses at me and Lena. Standard safety, rock stability, that kind of thing. If anything shifts, you're the ones folks will listen to. My stomach tightened. My face did the professional nodding. Someone asked about noise levels. The engineer smiled. The fans produce a low, constant hum, he said. Background noise. Really. Like a highway in the distance. I thought about the bowl's usual sounds. Wind. Ravens. The quiet scrape of Slate's gate. Background seemed like the wrong word. After the meeting, Lena caught my eye in the hallway. The hill finally got some rest, she murmured. Now we're teaching it to talk in machinery again. I didn't trust my voice, so I just walked with her to the garage, the memo crinkling in my jacket pocket. We started visiting the site more often, partly to prepare, partly because we didn't know what else to do. The survey flags showed up first, bright plastic squares staked along the access road and around the bowl. They flapped in the wind like little announcement banners, change is coming. The camera's logged slate still making his rounds. 4 prints. Drag. 4 prints. Sometimes he'd pause longer near a new flag. Head tilted. Whiskers forward. He never touched them. The man-made bright bits seemed to belong to a layer of reality he didn't intend to join. Regulations required a wildlife section in the environmental report. We wrote about slate there, frequency of visits, approximate range, the visible old injury that didn't seem to slow his commitment to this route. The sentences looked clinical, neatly stacked in black ink. They carried none of the weight they had for us. At home, I found myself turning off more things at night TV, radio. Even the ancient refrigerator hum started to grate. The town's train line cut through with its usual horns. But after mornings in the mine bowl, every manufactured sound felt like a cousin of those fans that hadn't even been installed yet. One night, a dream snagged me. In it, the fans roared to life, and the hill's rock rippled like water. Slate tried to walk his arc, but the ground shivered under each step. He didn't fall. He just disappeared, as if the mountain had blinked him away to escape the noise. I woke with my heart hammering. I told no one about the dream, but the feeling of it sat behind my ribs during the next planning call. The engineer talked about decibel limits, mitigation, schedules. I listened, answered, signed where needed. On the pad of my mind, though, a different question scribbled itself when the hill spoke in fan hum. Who would stay to listen? The test dates were set for early spring. Equipment would come up first, then wiring, then a week of full power runs. Our team would be on site for all of it. We were, after all, the rescue crew. We were there to respond if anything cracked. No one had a protocol for what to do if something went quiet. As the last patch of snow melted out of the bowl's corners, I drove up alone one afternoon and stood by the sealed shaft. The concrete plug felt cold even through my glove. You've already seen enough, I muttered to the hill. My breath steamed against the grey, then vanished, like most warnings do. When worry gets too big, I've learned to shrink it down into things I can hold. For me, that meant maps. We printed every camera capture from the past year and spread them across the incident room wall, a patchwork of seasons. Tracks, angles, times stamped in digital blue. With coloured pins and string, we traced where slate tended to move. Lines curved from the ravine up to the bowl, from a stand of junipers to the old service road, from behind a boulder to that familiar arc by the sealed shaft. It wasn't random at all. It was a route, worn into habit. The injured leg didn't keep him from covering ground. It just changed his tempo. The prints were sometimes closer together on steep sections, a little farther apart on softer flats. You could see the negotiations between pain and purpose written right there in the dirt. One small decision at a time. He's turned the closed mouth into just another stop, Lena said, following a string with her fingertip. Not a haunted place. Not a monument. Just part of the circuit. I liked that. People either feared the sight or forgot it. Slate, on the other hand, had absorbed it into his everyday life. The test fan pad on the engineer's blueprint sat right over a cluster of red pins, Slate's most frequent linger point. On paper, it was labelled Equipment Zone. Seeing it there, printed so calm and official, felt like reading a stranger's name on your own mailbox. We updated the wildlife section of the report with our map findings, adding phrases like regular usage corridor and consistent presence. The words were careful, measured. We knew they wouldn't stop the project. At best, they might nudge a fan a few yards one way or another. Off duty, the team talked about him the way people talk about a neighbour they only glimpse at certain hours. Jonah wondered where he'd end. Carol speculated about his age. I mostly listened, feeling a strange protectiveness pop up whenever someone tried to turn him into a mascot. He wasn't ours. He just shared the hill. The cameras picked up fewer visits on stormy mornings, more on still ones. No surprise there. Sound travels differently when the air is busy. On clear days, you could almost hear the quiet in those images, a softness in the posture of trees and fur. Jonah suggested we try audio on one of the cameras for a week. Maybe there's more going on than we see, he said. We wired in a little mic and let it run. The playback gave us what you'd expect: wind. A distant raven, the faint rattle of our own truck leaving. Nothing dramatic. Strangely, that reassured me. It confirmed what we already felt in our bones, that the bowl's main sound was absence. Silence, but not empty. The kind of quiet that has shape and texture, like a well-worn coat. Slate had chosen to make his hard-won steps in that kind of space. The equipment delivery date edged closer. Survey flags multiplied. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the access road. Each new mark felt, to me, like an eraser swipe over Slate's penciled lines. His roots were still there, but they risked being written over by heavier strokes. One evening, as we locked up, Lena paused by the wall of photos. If they're going to teach the hill a new noise, she said, we should at least listen to the old one more time. I knew what she meant before she clarified. Let's be there before the fans ever spin. I nodded slowly. Our job was to be on site for emergencies. But there are other kinds of duty bearing witness. Staying quiet when the world gets louder. We penciled an unofficial earlier arrival time into our calendars. No one at the regional office needed that detail. The hill would. The morning the machines arrived, the bowl looked like a loading dock. Flatbeds parked where ravens usually hop. Workers in bright vests moved cables and steel housings into place. The fans themselves were big metal drums, squat and patient, like they knew they were about to change the conversation. Our team stayed on the edges, watching anchors get drilled into rock. We checked the old concrete plug for hairline cracks, ran gloved hands along the fence, counted bolts. The familiar rituals steadied us. Even as the scene felt foreign, too much colour and motion in a place we were used to seeing half in shadow. The first test run was just a few minutes at low power. Even then, the sound surprised me. It wasn't deafening. It was worse, a steady, insistently present tone, low and broad, that seemed to slide under everything else. The hill, used to short interruptions, was being asked to hold a constant breath. Decibel meters clipped while jackets ticked up and settled. We logged the numbers within acceptable limits, according to the chart. But charts don't measure the expression on Lena's face as she looked out over the bowl, or the way my shoulders tightened without me telling them to. We ran through the safety checklist. All business, stability, vibration, loose rock, potential for collapse. The old fears we were trained for. No one had a line item for what happens to a place's character when you replace wind and bird calls with machinery, even on a temporary basis. After the contractors left for the day, we stayed to reset the cameras. The light had gone thin again, that blue-grey just before dark. I angled one lens more directly toward the fan pad, less for the equipment and more in case Slate decided to check on the new additions to his route. On the drive down, the truck cab felt unusually cramped. The radio stayed off. My own thoughts were noisy enough snatches of fan hum replaying against memories of the bowl's older quiet. Layered over the sight of that right hind leg testing the ground over and over in past clips. At home, I set the memo packet on the kitchen table and left it there, unopened. I brewed tea instead of coffee, watched steam rise in my small, cluttered kitchen, and thought about how easy it is to add sound to a landscape. How hard it is to remove it once ears have adjusted. The official full-power tests were scheduled for 2 days later. In the hour after sunrise, our team would be there. Rope bags ready, radios charged, helmets lined up. We'd stand at the bowl's rim and listen for cracks in stone. That was our assigned role. Quietly, parallel to that plan, Lena and I agreed on another. We'd go up even earlier, before the contractors, before the fans, before the bowl got its new song. No trucks, no generators, just our old rig, parked out of sight, and 2 tired humans borrowing one more slice of the hill's native silence. I set my alarm for an hour before my usual early. When you've lived long enough by shift schedules, your body gets used to being borrowed by other people's needs. This time, I wanted to loan it to a place instead, and to a Bobcat who had made that place part of his daily fight to keep standing. As I lay down that night, the hum from the tests still vibrated somewhere behind my ears. I focused on the memory of the bowl, without it, the soft scrape of gravel, the rustle of dry grass, the quiet question in Slate's careful steps. It was that quieter soundtrack I hoped to hear again. The town was still mostly dark when I met Lena at the station gate. Our breath puffed white in the headlights. before we turned them off. She climbed into the passenger seat with a thermos and a nod. No banter. Some mornings don't call for it. We took the ridge road slower than usual, tires whispering over gravel. The rescue truck rattled in all its familiar places, a collection of squeaks and thumps I could have mapped blindfolded. We left the radio off, letting the engine's old rhythm and the muffled wind fill the cab. Near the final bend, I eased my foot off the gas and let us coast. We killed the lights completely, trusting muscle memory and the pale suggestion of dawn ahead. The bowl loomed like a dark spoon hollowed out of the ridge. The sealed shaft just a deeper shadow at its centre. We parked well back from the edge, where the land levelled before dropping. I turned the key one last notch, and the engine ticked itself quiet. The sudden absence of vibration felt almost physical, like someone lifting a hand from my shoulder. My ears hummed for a beat, then settled. No flashlights, Lena murmured, already opening her door. Let's let the hill set the light level. It was the kind of half-joke she made when she meant something more serious. We stepped out into air that smelled of cold rock and the faint tang of metal. Our boots made soft, compressing sounds as we walked toward the bowl, careful not to kick loose stones. Above, stars still clung to the sky's upper corners, while the lower rim lightened to a tired steel blue. The sealed shaft came into view bit by bit, its lines familiar as the creases on my own hands. We stopped short of the fence. From here, we could see the fan housings on their pad-mute silhouettes waiting for power. Survey flags hung limp in the still air. The bowl held a thickness of quiet that you could almost lean on. I felt my breathing slow to match it. We listened. Years of search work had trained us to pick out oddities, shouts, falling rock, the whine of a misfiring engine. Here, there was only wind tracing the rim, a distant raven giving a single disinterested croak, and the small, steady rhythm of our own hearts. A faint scritch whispered from the left, the sound of something dislodging grit. Lena's hand brushed my sleeve. We turned together. From the line where scrub pine thickened, a shape detached itself, a low, muscled shadow moving with a familiar cadence. Step and step. Question. Answer. Slate. He paused when he saw us, head lifting, body still. The distance between us wasn't huge, but it felt significant. He could have turned back into the cover of the trees. Instead, after a long, considering moment, he resumed his path along the bowl's curve, keeping both us and the shaft within his field of view. The injured leg worked harder on the uneven rock. I watched the small calculations in each muscle, the way his tail flicked once when a step jarred. He did not hurry. There was no sense of flight in him, only a patient insistence on continuing the route he had carved for himself over seasons. He reached his usual linger spot near the old rails and settled into a sit, tail wrapping loosely around his front paws. From there, he could look toward the sealed mouth, towards the fan pad, toward us. The sky behind him had brightened just enough to halo his ears. We stood quietly, not speaking his name aloud, not raising cameras or phones. Whatever this was, it didn't feel like ours to document. It felt like a meeting called by someone who'd never seen a calendar, in a room older than our job descriptions. Time stretched. The world beyond the ridge contractors, trucks, schedules felt very far away. It was just us, the hill, and a bobcat with an old injury, all sharing the thin space before a new sound was scheduled to arrive. None of us quite knew what would happen next, but we all seemed to be waiting for it. Slate broke the stillness first. His ears rolled back, then forward, as if listening for something deep under the rock. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his weight forward and began to rise from his sit knot into a casual crouch. But higher, asking more from his back legs than we'd seen before. The right hind leg trembled as it took on the extra load. You could feel the argument in that limb from yards away, the way it hesitated, then tried anyway. His tail splayed slightly for balance. Lena drew in a quiet breath beside me, the kind you don't realize you're holding until it catches. Inch by inch. He pushed himself upright until his body lengthened fully. His front paws came to rest lightly on the rusty rail, not clinging, just touching, as if using it as a guide. He was standing on both back legs now, the injured one bearing its full share, however shakily. It didn't read like a trick, or a beg, or any behavior you might see in a training video. It looked like a choice, a decision to meet the sealed mouth of the hill at a new height, to refuse, just for this morning, to see it only from a crouch. From this angle, his head aligned almost level with the warning signs on the fence. The words meant nothing to him, but the barrier did. He glanced from the concrete plug to the fan housings. Then, astonishingly, to us, the look wasn't pleading or accusing. It was measuring. The bowl's usual noises fell away. Even the raven on the rim went quiet, as if sound itself had stepped back to give this moment room. In that suspended hush, I felt years of my own job compress accidents responded to. Ropes rigged, sirens chased, and here was a different kind of struggle playing out without any of our gear. My first instinct was to move closer, to be ready if he toppled. Training dies hard, but something in his stance stopped me. This fight to stand straight on a leg that had every excuse to stay bent was not one we could, or should, interfere with. He wasn't asking for a hand. He was asking for space. Time elongated. My knees ached in sympathy. A deep, sympathetic throb. I thought about all the mornings he must have spent up here alone, testing that limb, shaving off a fraction more hesitation with each circuit, while no cameras rolled and no humans watched. A faint crest of light spilled over the ridge then, catching in his fur, outlining him in soft gold. The fans sat silent on their pad. The truck still somewhere down the road. By sheer accident or grace, the hill had offered him one crystal pocket of quiet in which to make this stand. He held it longer than I would have believed, possible seconds stretching into a full half-minute. Maybe more. Then, with a control that made my chest ache, he eased weight back, lowering himself onto all fours. There was no collapse, no stumble, just a careful return to his usual height. Slate gave his chest a few brisk licks, as if smoothing down feelings along with fur. Then he turned his head once toward us. His eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat I felt an odd, level recognition. Two old bodies, both negotiating with time and damage, still choosing to show up. Without drama, he trotted toward the scrub line. Limp, noticeable, but not defining. Step, step, question, answer his rhythm, resume. In a few moments he vanished behind rock and pine, leaving only a faint disturbance in the gravel where he'd stood taller than his pain. When the first contractor truck ground up the access road minutes later, our team had already gathered at the rim. No one spoke about what we'd just seen. We didn't need to. The silence among us wasn't awkward or empty. It was the kind you use when you're afraid words will make something smaller than it really was. The fans ran their scheduled tests that day, and the next. Their low hum spread through the bowl, a constant backdrop to our checklists. We walked the slopes, watched for falling rock, logged measurements in neat columns. On paper, everything behaved. The hill, officially, was fine. Slate didn't show on any camera while the tests were underway. Intellectually, I was glad. Instinctively, I missed the streak of patterned fur in the grainy feed. I pictured him on a different shoulder of the ridge, listening, judging whether this new sound would become part of his world or something to skirt. After a week, the project leads declared the trial complete. Fans would be left in place but used rarely, only for quarterly checks. Compromise. They called it. Noise with a schedule. For the people in offices, that was the end of the story. For those of us who'd seen his stand, it felt more like a prologue. Back at the station, I wrote my final report on the test. I included a dry paragraph in the wildlife section about temporary absence of local bobcat during elevated noise periods and subsequent reappearance after cessation. Between the lines, I silently thanked him for coming back at all. It was a quiet morning in late May when a camera pinged us from North Ridge. Jonah pulled up the clip in the garage. There he was again, Slate, emerging from the scrub. Gait the same careful pattern. He crossed the bowl in front of the sealed shaft, paused at his usual spot, then moved on. Routine. Reclaimed. Watching that short video, I felt something unclench inside me. He hadn't abandoned the closed mouth, after all. He'd simply waited for it to remember how to be itself again. His fight to stand hadn't been about impressing us. It had been about claiming his place in the story of that hillside. A few months later, an opportunity came up to move into a training role closer to town, less climbing, more teaching. My knees and my doctor both voted yes. Part of me hesitated, thinking of the ridge, of early patrols, of watching the bowl turn from dark to day. Eventually, I signed the papers. On my last official visit to North Ridge as part of the active team, I went up alone at dawn. No tests scheduled, no trucks coming, just me, the sealed shaft, and the faint hope of one more glimpse of a cat who owed me nothing. He didn't appear. That was all right. The hill felt full anyway. I stood by the fence and rested my palm on a wooden post, feeling the rough grain under my glove. We tried not to make it worse. I said quietly to the concrete and rock, "The rest is between you and whoever keeps walking up here on their own." The wind took the words and filed them somewhere I couldn't see. These days, when the new recruits ask about the injured Bobcat story, they've half heard from someone in the garage. I don't start with the fans or the paperwork. I start with the way he moved, step, step, question, answer, over and over, until standing taller became something his body could consider again. I tell them about that one quiet morning, how our whole rescue team, people trained to shout orders and call for choppers, stood absolutely still while a wild animal made a choice in front of us. No sirens, no heroics, just respect, and a silence so deep it still echoes in me. If the hill remembers anything of us, I hope it isn't the machinery we brought or the concrete we poured. I hope it remembers that, at least once. We turned everything off and simply listened while one injured bobcat fought to stand again, and that every one of us, hardened as we were, had the sense to keep our mouths shut. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.